Morning. Welcome to the first episode of the Housing Signal. I'm Abe Alisoff, founder of PHA Authority.ai, an AI readiness consulting practice built for public housing authorities. Before launching PHA Authority, I served as the Deputy Director of Development at the Battle Creek Housing Commission in Michigan, where I managed and helped manage 349 units of public housing in our portfolio that I converted through RAD. I helped oversee 550 housing choice vouchers and led the agency's first LIHTC co-developer RFQ. My co-host today is Joe Galvin. Joe is a two-time former HUD Midwest Regional Administrator with direct oversight of every public housing authority across Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin. Today, Joe leads the housing practice at Galvin and Associates and is a collaborator with PHA Authority.ai. Joe, welcome.
Thank you.
And then our very first guest is someone who sits exactly where this show lives. Vinay Singh served as the Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer and Chief Financial Officer at HUD. Senate confirmed at the Assistant Secretary level, he stood up the CAIO function at the department from the ground up and led its responsible AI governance work during a pivotal period of federal policy change. Today, Vinay is the founder of SolveForV.ai and sits on the board of the AI Coalition. Vinay, thank you for being our very first guest on the Housing Signal.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. I'll jump in with the first question. What was the moment inside of HUD when you realized AI could actually change something on the ground versus sit on a memo?
Yeah, as CFO, I also had the function of customer experience, and I would say that, just citizens and folks that receive funding have a very difficult time interacting with government agencies. And so I saw AI as a tool that would definitely change that for those struggling with housing, those struggling to just even understand how to get grants and how to go about it. But that evolved from there into, as CFO, also dealing with audit and compliance issues, the payment integrity findings that were out there from GAO and OMB. Was another area where I thought instead of blockchain, the stickiness blockchain, actually going and using AI to solve some of the compliance related issues.
You all were using blockchain to help fix the compliance issues.
We weren't looking at it, we were exploring it, right? So my background coming in, obviously I had some technology and I was wondering why it was difficult to kind of trace funding through and why these findings were coming out to the tune and estimating of, $1 billion, $2-3 billion of potential fraud, waste, and abuse. So we weren't using blockchain. Many agencies had talked about blockchain and basically trying to solve for how can we get better at understanding where the funding goes through the pipeline. And so looking at blockchain came with a lot of potential pitfalls. And so once AI jumped on the map, after considering and thinking through the customer experience and using AI to change how taxpayers can interact with HUD and other agencies, it was also, well, how can AI potentially help with compliance issues, fraud, waste, and abuse issues? Yeah, so it evolved into that.
Vinay, once again, it's a pleasure to welcome you back. When you were at the forefront of leading AI over at HUD, we had the pleasure of working together at a fireside chat at the National NARO conference. And HUD was just trying to address the whole AI issue, and you were given great leadership. So we moved on a little bit. But like most things, when you hear most PHA directors and leaders, they hear about OMB M21 or M25 and 22, and what they hear is another mandate. So what is the thing HUD leadership has not said out loud about what AI is really going to require of a housing authority over the next 2 years?
So I don't know if they're not saying it out loud. I think where I pivot to with AI at HUD and still having relationships there, and there's a couple of public RFIs that have been put out specifically from, CFO, is around grants intelligence. So, I think folks should just really be thinking this administration has really used the mantle of fraud, waste, and abuse. And I don't think that's wrong, but I don't think it's as exaggerated as maybe sometimes it is in the press. But I think anyone who's getting HUD funding needs to think about how to use AI to really clean up their back end. Like there are processes that are bad. Again, I'm not saying just to add tech, because I'm never just a tech solution guy. You have to have kind of that all before deploying tech. But there are processes that can be sped up, keeping the guardrails in check. And I think folks really have to look at what HUD is putting out. I think the grants intelligence piece about understanding subrecipient data, recipient data, there's a lot of manual processing, a lot of documentation. These are things that if you're doing it on your own, you don't need to wait for any agency to come and say, this is what you should do. So I think folks have to be, and I understand the privacy concerns. I understand that there's a lot of that, but there are ways to actually, protect that information. So I think it's just getting smarter about your data that PHAs have. I think it's just making sure you've got literacy, fluency, conversant, and understanding some of the tools that are out there is the first step. And you've heard me say this before, but that's where I even started was we even know what AI is, right? You've heard me say before about the offense and defense, and people were very frightened about AI and still are. But we have to talk through those things. And I think that conversation is critical and it's not happening fast enough. So I think regarding the memos, I mean, for us, it was 2410. Now it's 2521, 2522. The themes are similar around balancing innovation and risk. And that's something in any organization that you always have to think about. So I think just to be prepared, you've got to be educated. And so that would be the first step.
Vinay, you're spot on. Federal employees look at this, and once again, another administration, another new thing. But when it translates down to the local levels, the local public housing authorities, it really does speak to not being afraid of something that they may or may not be familiar with, but rather trying to understand how can this make their lives easier? How can they be better adjusted to spending the funds, which is really one of stewardship across the board. You've just explained it quite nicely, like you did 2 years ago.
Yeah. And to that point, something else I think that gets lost on some of the PHAs with AI is it's going to allow a lot more time for the managers and the front line to be able to actually go out and help the residents instead of figuring out whether they punched in the social security number right. Having been previously at a PHA where they were still pen and paper, that is of itself its own compliance issues. I mean, yes, you have to guard it, but at the same time, that can be leaked just in a different avenue, as say something through an AI related leak.
That's correct. That's correct. I think, what I used to tell the folks and even when I talk to the union, concerns about job and, what am I going to do if I have, AI comes in. I said, there are so many things that HUD does, so many things that PHAs do, just like you said, Joe, that if you save a little bit of time here, you can actually go and deploy and be focused more on the mission. The back end is the back end. So I always say, you can look at AI and there are definitely existential potential threats that are talked about all the time. But as I speak to organizations, I always say, actually, if government can get AI right, then you get the trust of the citizen, the taxpayer, and you slowly move that forward where there. And if you have more momentum on the positive side, this is the age old story about good over bad, light over dark. I mean, that's where I think government should play a role a little bit more and be transparent about it.
So, if you were an executive director of, say, any public housing authority, but in this case, a 500 unit authority tomorrow, what is the first AI play you would make? And what is the one that everyone is talking about that they should make, but is wrong?
Well, I think they're talking about the tech and you're seeing a lot of, companies come out there. I think what you folks do is the right way to approach it, which is take a step back and to first understand your data, understand what data that you control, put those guardrails around what you can and cannot share. But then also just understand how this impacts your overall mission. I think people are going straight to tech and solutions, and they're not understanding really just what their broken processes are, where their data is just not accessible or is not being used appropriately. I think you've got to really do that strategic thinking is getting lost. And I'm not talking about death by committee and just sitting in committee meetings and debating it, but really taking a strategic approach to it and not just deploying it and saying, okay, I have Microsoft this, or, I'm not picking one vendor over another, but everyone is just saying, buy this, buy that. I mean, you guys are all getting AI linked things on LinkedIn and emails. It's not about that. It's about what are you actually trying to do? And we say this all the time, but like, what problem are you trying to solve? Take your strategic plan, look at your problem sets and say what's your priority and what's taking too much time, and then start mapping out potential and start small, right? The small incremental pilots, use cases, and have that funnel so that you do address risk, and the government has put out some great, risk frameworks, obviously the NIST RMF framework and others.
Yeah. To your point, like some people will just let's introduce AI, and it's like we got Copilot, so we've got AI, and like to your point, they're not talking about the pain points. Like for instance, being in a public housing authority, when I see my asset manager for 30 minutes on the phone doing this conversation that could be handled by a AI agent that can, hey, when do I need to renew my paperwork? it tells them. It knows exactly. So unless it's something really urgent where you actually need a human involved, a lot of it is taken out of the equation. That friction's gone, and they can now spend more time helping the residents not struggling with talking to someone about what they need to do. It's already been addressed to them.
Vinay, once again, you're on target with all this, and because when you look across the nation, over 3,300 public housing authorities. In the Midwest, we had over 517 public housing authorities. A lot of them are so small, they can't keep up with rules, they can't keep up with the regs. So we've talked about regionalization and where some of these mid-sized and larger housing authorities can work in conjunction with these smaller housing authorities. AI will allow them to do that. It'll help them manage across boundaries, whether it's local or state. And let me just say this much, this last point. This is an interesting podcast because we have all three levels covered. We have the feds from Washington, Vinay, I'm the regional guy, and then we have the local guy. So I think we all understand the issues.
Absolutely. And some of the conferences and things that I work on, I always talk about this when folks are talking about AI. And in fact, at the time, I was actually talking to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania too, really bringing all three levels together, because that's what, especially how HUD is situated, the money doesn't go directly to the citizen. So you have to actually have everyone talking at the same time. It's that whole concept of all in that I used to say. And I think that's continued at HUD. I mean, I talked to some of the leadership, and I think they have that mindset where it's not about the negative and the dangerous side you're hearing about AI. They're saying, hey, let's get smarter where we can. I think they could do more overall, or the government could do more on the literacy piece. I think the Department of Labor has put out some good stuff, although the CIO over there is making some good strides.
Well, I have our last question then, Vinay. Coming out of HUD, what made you pick founding Solve for V.ai over joining a firm or continuing in the Department of HUD?
Well, I was a political, so couldn't stay on. It was at the discretion of the president. Would have loved to stay and help our folks there. But, I had a lot of conversations. I used to be Big Four consultant, and going in, I'm still an advisor or consultant, but we all are, right? Just like we're all program and project managers in our day-to-day lives. But I had a couple conversations where people were just asking me to essentially burn my Rolodex and get sales. And I just didn't want to do that anymore. A convergence in my skills and my passion for communities. I was like, look, I'm not ready to do a nonprofit, but I can do a for-profit that is light profit and targeted towards things like economic community development. And with AI added to my kind of list of skills, I saw that, I saw the need for people to just really understand it and to take the optimistic or positive view. And again, I'm always learning. So I know, there are not always great things. I have to always caveat it with that. But again, to my point about light over dark or good over bad, you got to be educated first. So I think, starting Velocity Group, which website is for V.ai, we have a lot of clients that, Primus Partners is one of them. They're an India consulting company that, has opened up a shop in Washington, D.C. We're learning a lot of innovation from overseas. I was at the AI Summit in New Delhi, the annual AI Summit, with Primus. And so it just gives me a lot of flexibility and adaptability to pick projects and things that I really like. And then really to bring people along. Because the other thing I like, when you work inside a big organization, you can be good with people, for people. But when you're on your own, I mean, just what I've learned and developed over time is, I care a lot about people, and, to do anything, have any success, it's the people around you and the people that work with you. And so, it allows me to do that at my own pace. And I get a little bit more tennis, a little more golfing as well.
Hey, Vinay,
That's it.
you're spot on. When you start talking about mission, because that's what it's all about. But now you're able to utilize what I'll call the inside baseball that can help the housing authorities or whoever the clients might be to understand what the federal government is looking for. So that's wonderful. I'm in the same boat. It's all about mission, the relationships and reputation about helping people. It's still out there. And I think you and I, and certainly Abe, we can be much more effective from this side of the aisle, working in the private sector, we're not profits and government, using our knowledge. Yeah.
Absolutely. I will throw in one other plug for one of the companies I have with a partner called VedTech, and it's dabbling into that education technology piece. And one of my clients is a college that owns a K-12 school as well. That's really where you see passion. I just recently was part of the presidential AI challenge with the White House, and some of the competitions and I was a judge for the state and regional level, it's wonderful to see kids and teachers looking at this, because the fear that we have of AI, we're closer to the end perhaps than the beginning. But these kids, to see how they can do good with it, that's what keeps my optimism about AI alive.
Yeah.
And that's why we partner up with young men like Abe.
Well, Vinay, this has been exactly the conversation we hoped to open with. Thank you for being our first guest. For the listeners, you can find the Housing Signal on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and at phaauthority.ai. We'll see you on the next episode.